Good day, folks. Welcome back to the MB Wildman channel. On today's video, we are giving you the scoop on poop. All right, so this is everything that you can kind of tell or figure out from deer poop, right? So whether you're calling it scat or whether you're calling it deer, whatever you're calling it, out there on the trail, out there as you're hunting, you can actually tell an awful lot about an animal, about a deer in general, from their scat, from their droppings, okay? I am not an expert on all of this. I can only tell you what I know from experience, what I've done from research. But here's what I can tell you. A lot of people out there, a lot of hunters are going to tell you, well, you can tell if it's a buck or a doe from the pile of droppings. Maybe. I'm going to go with a solid maybe on that one. You can tell if it's a buck or a doe based on a couple of different things, but the droppings themselves aren't one of them. Okay, so what you'll notice, what scientists have sort of proven, etc., is that once a deer reaches adulthood, so once it's not a fawn or a year-old, once it gets to that adult deer stage, then the droppings are all the same. Right, so it doesn't make any difference the size or whatever. Like when you look at, I'm just knelt down here right beside a nice little pile of droppings, and when you look at what a deer dropping looks like, when you look at, let me see if I can show you here. Right, so when you look at what they look like, right, the deer droppings, they're pretty much, 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, elongated, right? So they're a bit of an oval shape. And they can vary in color and they can vary in like consistency. But as far as size goes, that's an adult deer dropping right there. Okay, so it's that could be a 250-pound buck or that could be a 100-pound doe. Their body system, that's the same. Okay, so don't let someone look down and go, wow, look at that. That's a big buck right there. If you're going by the size of the droppings, no, you can't tell. They're all the same. Now, what you can tell if it's an adult deer or not. So take a look right here. I'm going to show you the droppings of a fawn, right? So the pellets are real small and they're all the same size pretty much, but there aren't very many of them and they are quite tiny. So when you look at these little tiny pellets, they're almost like a rabbit-sized pellet, but they are small and they are the elongated ones. I mean, so you know that they're deer for sure. But there's just a small little pile, like I said, maybe 20 or 30 tucked down in the leaves here. And they're pretty glossy, pretty shiny. So they're quite fresh. They're still a little bit slippery actually. So they're quite fresh. So there's been a yearling or a lamb here, within the last little bit, right? Last hour, maybe hour and a half. Okay. But as you can see, if you look at if you see the content of my hand right there, like they're just real small little pellets. Okay. So that's definitely a lamb or a year-old, not a full-grown adult deer at all. All right, and then I just showed you right here the adult size, right? So obviously the fawn droppings are smaller and they're much less. Now, what you can tell when you look at the droppings as far as buck-doe goes, what you can tell is if it's a buck or doe based on the size of the pile, not the size of the individual droppings themselves. So don't be confused, right? A doe, when she goes to the bathroom, right? So she basically... statistics and studies and all that, she will basically drop 50 to 60 pellets in her little pile. And a buck, on the other hand, will drop between 60 and 80, somewhere in that range, right? So there's so the size of the actual pile, if you want to get down and count a pile of deer poop, then you can pretty much tell buck or doe based on the size of the pile. I don't know where you're at or what it's like. That would be super tough for me in New Brunswick. Like I'm here in a place, there's leaves on the ground, there's sticks on the ground. I'm knelt down right beside a pile of droppings. They're not all like, boom, right there. There's a few, where they've splashed off to the side. There's a few step forward and back. I don't know, right? But the size of the pile, if it's a nice big pile, it looks like there's a lot of pellets in it, better than average chance that that's a buck as opposed to a doe. Is it a 250-pound buck or a 120-pound buck? No idea, and you can't really tell. Now, you're going to get hunters and you're going to get comments, and I'm sure I'm going to get comments on the video about people, I can tell if it's a buck just by smelling it, just by the look of it. Okay, then you're awesome. Like you're a super hunter man, woman, whatever. But really, like scientifically, you can't tell the difference based on the size of the pellet. Only the number of pellets will tell you the difference. Okay, so what else can deer droppings tell us, right? So let's say that we are, we're hunting along, we're walking through the woods, or we're scouting, and we find a pile of deer droppings. Well, let's take a look at the pile itself and see what it looks like. So in my case right here, here's what I got. Okay, so this is what I've just come across right here. It's a pretty decent pile, and I would have to guess that it's probably, if I had to guess, I'd say that's a doe based on, the size of the pile. It's not a great big, it looks like about that, 50 to 60 pellet range, somewhere there. That's what I'm looking at. Okay, so this pile right here that I just showed you, it's a little bit lightish brown in color. What does this tell us? Well, first of all, there was a little bit of frost in it. So I can tell you that it's been there overnight. If you come across a pile of deer droppings and they're slick and they're shiny, and they're almost like there's a membrane, like a clear membrane on the outside of them, and they're a darker color, pretty good chance that pile of droppings is literally only hours old, and that deer is still in the area. Now these ones here are a lighter brown color, okay? So they're a little bit lighter brown, and they're not super hard, they're kind of soft. So there's 3 different sort of kinds of droppings that you can find when you're out there scouting. And I'm going to focus my information basically on fall and winter, like into the fall, because that's when we hunt here in New Brunswick. So it does change a fair bit in the summertime as opposed to in the fall. But I'm going to focus on the fall. In the fall, deer will typically go to the bathroom. They will poop between 10 and 15 times a day. Now, in the summer, that almost doubles. With everything going on in the fall, with the change in the food and the change in the temperature and the change in the breeding habits, it's a little, it's a fair bit less that they go, but still, that's a lot. That's a lot of time. So there's 10 or 15 piles of this every single day from a deer. So that's a lot, right? What is that going to tell us? Well, right now I can tell you that this deer, these are kind of soft. They're not rock hard, but they're not like slimy and goopy either. So this deer is probably foraging on a combination of both some, some browse and some grains out in, some field area, things like that. If you take one of these pellets and break it open, if you're not afraid to handle the poop, if you break one of these pellets open like this, and you can see from the pellet itself, if I can show you, you see from the pellet itself that it's fibrous, right? So there's a lot of grain in there, right? So the grasses and grains and whatnot in that pellet. Okay, so this deer obviously has been feeding most likely on, like some grainage from a farm field or some agriculture field. Also maybe some twigs and some sticks and some browse. If I was going to try to track this deer down based on this pile of droppings, I'd be looking for for this agriculture field, probably right back there, where they just harvested some wheat or some soybean or whatever off of that field. I'd be looking for that, during the feeding times and things like that. If it's dark black and it's really, really hard, like if it's a dark color and it's hard, then you know that deer has been foraging almost exclusively on like bushes or the tips of like buds and trees and small, sticks like that. I'd be looking for a clear cut that's starting to grow back. You got some young maple or some young, trees coming up in it. The tops of trees that have been fallen from the forestry, process or whatever. And you can also get droppings that are almost runny. So they don't always come in this pellet form. And I'll show you a picture right here. So this is all kind of gooped together. Those droppings there, that poop there is all kind of grouped together and squished together in like almost like a log or like a mass, like a clump. That tells me that deer's been eating a lot of soft mass, large leafy type stuff. Might have been on a food plot, might have been eating alfalfa, might have been also some fruit, right? So anything that's soft like that, really, really watery and really, really juicy. You find that a lot in orchards, right? Now, you don't find this type of deer scat as much because a good heavy rain here in New Brunswick will wash most of that away, right? So where the pellets will last for quite a little while. If you come across pellets that are light color brown and really dried out, that's still a good sign that there was deer in the area, but those pellets are at the very earliest, they're 4 or 5 days old, and they might be weeks old. You can find pellets, they stay on the ground, deer pellets, and they can be there for months. So it is important to know the freshness of a pellet and what that kind of tells you about the deer in the area. Okay, I'm going to stop right here for a second. I just showed you another pile of droppings right here. This one's right at the edge of a little scrape. But there's some real deep cover, some real deep woods in back of this way, some heavy thicket. That's the 5th or 6th pile of droppings I've found, just within a little tiny square area here, right? So just from where I was, and I kind of walked down and up against the edge of this thicket, and that's the 5th or 6th pile that I found. So what does that tell me? Not necessarily buck, doe, whatever, but what that tells me is that this is almost definitely a bedding area for deer. So you know that old saying that your grandma used to say, you know, you should never where you sleep or where you eat? Well, deer aren't like that. So what happens is, in a bedding area for sure, is that a deer will lay down, they'll get up, when they stand up and they'll stretch and they'll get ready to go to feed or they gotta go to water or whatever, and they'll poop right there. Either right on the edge of their bed, or they'll take a couple of steps out into the open and then they'll poop. So if you find consistently piles, especially in a place like New Brunswick where the population isn't heavy, and maybe where you're at, like it's really obvious where the bedding areas are and where the feeding areas are. Here in New Brunswick, lots of times we got a pile of woods and a pile of like public ground and all of that. It's sometimes it's really difficult to tell whether you're in a travel route, a corridor, a feeding area, bedding area, whatever. But you can tell if you find bunches of piles of deer scat, of droppings, and then you got some thick woods all sort of around you, one side or the other, or both, then you're pretty much guaranteed that you're in a bedding area. The same goes for a feeding area. If you're out on the edge of a field, or you've got a clear cut that's starting to grow back or whatever it might be, and you're finding in that clear cut or in the edges of that, you're finding piles, 5, 6, 8, 10 piles, whatever, as you're cruising through, as you're scouting, of deer droppings. I'm not going to be able to say if it's a 250-pound, 12-point buck in there, but I'm going to be able to tell you that's a feeding area, and that we should be looking at that area as a place to hunt, either coming to, going from, or if you can get back off of that area, and actually watching that feeding area, that's a good evening type hunting spot. So what I'm saying is that not only the size of the pile can tell you, kind of the type of deer in the area, but the number of piles that you find and the places that you find them can tell you that you're in either a bedding area or you're in a feeding area. Now, there's tons of places here where I scout and I find, oh, there's a nice little trail going right through there. There's a lot of track going right through there, but there's no droppings. So if you're in New Brunswick or wherever you are, and you're finding a place where it looks like there's a lot of deer activity, you're seeing some deer sign, you're seeing some deer trails, you're seeing some tracks, etc., but you're not seeing those piles of droppings, you're in a travel area, you're in a corridor, you're somewhere between where they're bedding, they're feeding, and they're drinking, right? So you're in those trails. Great places to hang tree stands, great places to watch, late afternoon, early mornings when they're coming to and from those bedding and feeding areas. Okay, just walking down the trail here, and I got something to show you. So you can see right here, I'm coming down this little trail here, right here, right? And looking down, and I'm seeing this big pile right here of droppings. Okay, so a lot of pellets. Now these pellets are all pretty much the same size as the first ones that I showed you. They're a little darker in consistency. They're much fresher. See how they're shiny like this? So those pellets right there, they're nice and shiny. They've still got that slippery coating on them, and you can tell they haven't been rained on yet, so that slippery coating isn't the rain, and they're a little soft, right? So they've been feeding on some mass, right? Probably from that soybean field, etc. But look at the size of the pile. Now, I'm not going to go through and count these, but if you just pull a few leaves back, what you can see is that this is definitely, if I was going to tell you, this is definitely from a nice buck. Again, I don't know what's on its head, but this is a mature deer, right? So this is an adult buck deer. There's enough pellets here for me to believe that there's like 60 or 80 in the group. There's a nice pile of pellets right here. And I mean, it covers a pretty decent area. You can't see them all on the camera, but that's going to be my belief that that pile is from a buck. All right, so let's sum it up. What can we learn from deer droppings? What can we learn from finding deer poop out while we're scouting, while we're hunting, while we're out there in the woods, just walking the dog, whatever we're doing? Okay, here's what we know. We can only tell the difference between a juvenile and an adult deer based on the size of the pellet. Once the pellet gets to be adult size, that's the size for every deer. But you can tell the bigger the size of the pile, the bigger the pile of scat, the bigger the pile of poop, the bigger the deer. So if you see an average size pile, 50, 60 pellets, 40, 60 pellets, just an average size pile, likely a small buck or a doe. You see a big pile, 60, 70, 80 pellets, big piles of the soft mass, then you're pretty much looking at a big-bodied, a large, mature deer. Several piles all in the same area is either going to tell you bedding area or feeding area. You can also tell what a deer's been eating as well by looking at their droppings, right? So if I know that a deer is a lot of soft mass stuff, I should be looking in orchards and fruit areas and things like that, large green leafy areas for the deer during their feeding times. Or if it's hard and a lot of fibrous mass or a lot of like grainage, then you should be looking for cutovers. Then they're eating a lot of twigs, a lot of leaves, a lot of roughage, stuff like that. So all right, well, listen, I hope this is something that can help you out. And again, this is the scoop on deer poop, how we interpret it, how we read it, how we use it to be a more successful hunter. So hope this is something that helps. And until next time, happy hunting from the NB Wildman channel.